Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about a bit about the user perspective of semantic wikis. So an analysis that we've done just with data, not talking directly to the users, but really analyzing how these communities behave. I hope you'll find it interesting. There's 3 papers that I actually posted on the conference site on the wiki that you can look for details. So I'll show you a lot of tables and data, but don't worry about the details. I'll just hit the high-level points, but you can find all the details in the papers. This is work with Varun Ratnakar, who's sitting somewhere in the back, and Ricky Sethi at ISI, but also 3 high school students who find this topic really fascinating and interesting. And if high school students can use and understand semantic wikis, I think that says a lot for this field. I'm very interested in users. I have many years of developing systems for interactive knowledge capture. I just want to walk you a little bit through what the users think about systems that actually reason and think about knowledge. Canal was a very sophisticated tool that helped users describe processes, very complex processes. And I remember our users sitting back and saying, I'm not feeling it today. So it was like, how is my tool supposed to help you feel it today? So users present a lot of challenges, and their incentives and their motivation to actually be engaged with our tools is something that has always, puzzled me and interested me. Shaken was a tool where we had biologists describe biological processes, and the tool was interactively assisting them to do this. And a lot of the activities that I observed with the users were for them to actually learn to think in a more logical or structured way rather than in text. And I remember one of them saying at the end of one of these sessions, saying, after using Shaken, I'll never think about biology the same way ever again. So he said, now I'm going to really understand how comprehensive my knowledge is, how detailed it is, how consistent it is. So that's the kind of reaction from users that you want. I'll tell you from Learner, I talked about it yesterday, so it was a system that collected a lot of common knowledge, common sense knowledge from users. And I remember we had a user that just kept coming back and had hundreds of edits every day. And I was like, what's happening? So we actually contacted this user and asked him, what was his motivation? Why was he so participating in this? And you'll never guess what he said. He said, this is so much cheaper than therapy. It's so soothing that the system listens, and I'm helping, and it's just great. So anyway, there's the user's perspective of what brings them to do this, and what do they like about structuring knowledge, and can they even do it? So to me, semantic wikis are really a way to capture knowledge, and it's really a microcosm of the semantic web that really interests me. Really having users do things, this is an example from the Peace Corps Wiki, really define properties and actually giving them a label and then putting in another page a summary of every object that has that property and their value. To me, this is fascinating. Just through so many years of seeing how difficult this is, just seeing the semantic wikis being used by non-professional knowledge representation people is really fascinating. So while the rest of the semantic web research is very focused on linked data and linked data and linked data, I find this absolutely fascinating. This doesn't just happen once, but I see many hundreds of semantic wikis being used out there. So to me, this is Christmas. There's been a lot of people analyzing wiki communities, what are their incentives, how to best manage the interactions, all kinds of topics. There's lots of analysis, particularly of Wikipedia. There's also a lot of work on taking knowledge and formulating structured content from wikis. And there's also a lot of other work on social knowledge collection, just communities of people forming knowledge bases. I think that semantic wikis offer a different perspective on collecting knowledge. It seems to be very successful because there's hundreds of them, and we've been hearing about a lot of these yesterday. to me, what's interesting particularly about Semantic MediaWiki is this idea that it has minimal knowledge representation requirements to use it. There's other semantic wikis, but they seem to be more inaccessible to end users. So I'd like to really understand how these semantic technologies are adopted so broadly by studying semantic wiki communities. Ultimately, I'm interested in techniques to improve the quality of the knowledge in these wikis, to see how far we can go in formalizing knowledge, coordinating the activities of contributors. There's many interesting research questions. So I'll tell you the story in two phases. First, we took about 20 semantic MediaWiki communities and analyzed them, and then we took 230. So we just grew up an order of magnitude. So I'll tell you about that a bit later. First, we took 20 semantic MediaWiki communities. We looked at wikis that seemed interesting and very different, very diverse. So just to get a sampling. And this was done just by browsing the directory from Referata. We collected a lot of data automatically through the API. And we started thinking about, how the users could be divided into viewers that just consult the wiki, just come to see what's there, editors that edit text of any kind in the wiki, and then distinguishing property editors or concept editors, people that actually edit the semantic aspects of the wiki. So we started distinguishing those. These 20 wikis, as I said, were very diverse. So some of them were scientific, hobbies. Somebody was asking me this morning, computer hardware, wiki devi, describing computer hardware, biology, all kinds of topics here. There's a lot of details about this statistic in the paper. What I want to show you is that it really blows my mind that there's, for this particular wiki, there's 18 edits to just the price range of the food in a restaurant. So that this is, to me, fascinating to see how that evolves. And then what happens when you've asserted a lot of price ranges for a lot of restaurants, and then the property actually changes. So how does that get managed? And then also that a lot of the properties seem to have several edits in general. So this I did not expect to see. I thought, they'll create a property and just live with it forever. So here's an example of something that we found. So the number of property editors does not seem to grow proportionally with the number of editors. So not everybody becomes a semanticist in these wikis. That's interesting to me. It looks like the distribution of editors that actually edit properties in the wiki is very different. So I was wondering always, how do they coordinate all these property edits? So if I'm adding values to these properties and assertions, and then someone edits the property, is that going to mess me up? What's happening, right? So, so what we found is that most wikis, whatever their size, even if they're huge, with huge amount of content, most wikis had a very small amount of property editors. Only one wiki had 300 editors. So what we found is that again, we're talking about 20 wikis. We found that most of them had a very small number. So we started creating these categories. A monarchy would have 2 or 3 editors. An oligarchy would have 4 to 9 editors. A republic would have 10 to 40 editors, and a democracy would have more than 40. These are somewhat arbitrary, but in some sense it gives you an idea of how much communication needs to happen between these editors to really coordinate the edits. And so if you do this, you see that there's actually many wikis that have 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 editors, but a lot of them have just 1. There's a few that have additional ones. There's even less that have, I think, between 9 and 15. And then just 1 of the 20 that really had more than 200 editors. And you can see the number of edits really tapers out. So to me, this was really interesting because one of the challenges is to really coordinate across all the contributors and all these edits to the wiki. So we went back and looked at an order of magnitude more wikis. So we took data from 230 semantic wikis. Why 230? At the time, there were 489 wikis in Referata. Active appeared to be 362. We looked at those that had accessible APIs. We looked at those that were actually live and responsive. And we took out wikis that we knew were developed by semantic web researchers, because we don't count. We also took out data from anonymous users, so we thought that that might include a lot of spam and really bias the data. And then also we took care to separate users from bots. So this is a lot of detail, so it's all in the paper. I just want to give you an idea of the kinds of things that we looked for. We wanted to know how many semantic concepts were defined. We wanted to know how many users, concept creators, we call them, edited concepts, how many concept edits were done to change concepts. Same thing for structured properties, how many were created, how many people were involved in creating properties, so we call them property creators, how many edits were done to properties. Separate from that, how many assertions were done using those properties. How many pages were in the wiki in total, how many contributors were to the wiki, so editors of either semantic or non-semantic information, and then page edits. So we took a lot of data from the API. These are very raw metrics, and you can imagine that depending on the size of the contributors or the size of the wiki, that may make the data more or less comparable. So we also took indices that really give us indications of the relative size of these metrics. So, so we would create proportions based on the number of pages, or the number of contributors, or the number of edits, or the number of properties. So it's very hard to follow in this kind of short talk, but we had to give a name to each one of these metrics, and it's all very confusing. But I'll walk you through the very basic results. So not many concepts are created. Users don't seem to like concepts at all. Only 53 wikis had any kind of concept created, and most of them had very few. Only 3 wikis had more than 10 concept contributors, so that's very, very little. This is, the use of concepts is just very sparse. Properties, exactly the opposite. So every wiki had some property defined. This seems to be extremely popular. 50 wikis had more than 100 properties defined. So we're not talking about a dozen properties or 20. We're talking about, pretty large numbers that just seem to require some coordination. Properties seem to be pretty heavily edited, so the number of property creators is very high. Sorry, it was not very high. It was about 24 for most wikis. So the number of property creators is very small, but many properties are being edited and created. And the number of property editors is small. Many wikis have statements that say, don't create any properties unless you talk to us, or and so on. So that there seems to be some organization as far as, and conventions as far as property editing. Very, very heavy use of property assertions, so hundreds of thousands of assertions is normal. And then finally, most of the assertions were done by humans. I was surprised about this also. I thought that most of them would be done by bots, but that was not the case. So one thing that was curious to us is that the growth of the wikis really, was not stale. The wikis seemed to continue to grow over time. And we did see that some of the wikis have gradual growth, so they're always growing steadily, but there's others that have big spikes. So if these spikes are caused by bots, then some of them are pretty steep, then how come we don't seem to see so many edits coming from bots, that most of them come from humans? So one question that I'm asking myself now is, was there some kind of set of properties defined that then enabled the community to contribute a lot of content? So how are these spikes related to temporal progression of the growth of the wiki. So there's lots of questions remaining. This is one of them. I think there's a lot to do in terms of collecting more data, collecting better data, also interviewing the communities, seeing how those few editors that we see actually coordinate the editors. Maybe there's some methodology and some principles to how semantic wikis are actually formed. So it's not just the technology, but also the social conventions and the agreements that they have on how to grow the wikis. So the conclusions, so they're a very popular platform for social knowledge collection. We analyzed 230 wikis. Some of our results, we really detected patterns of use of wikis. In general, and most wikis do not have very many editors that deal with semantic edits. The number of property editors does not seem to grow with the number of editors in general, so very few still only sign up to be property editors for some reason, and they tend to be a small amount of the users. The property assertions are very, very heavily used, so the properties don't just get created and sit there. And then most edits are done by humans. So a big message perhaps of this analysis is that concepts don't seem to be very popular. I was not just surprised, I was quite shocked by this. And properties are very, very popular, but only created by a small group of people. And there's lots of further work to do. I hope that you find the topic intriguing. I'd love to work with many of you to analyze how our communities work. And I'll leave time for questions.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, very interesting findings. Just on the topic of concepts, a small remark. I'm not so surprised by that, because concepts so far mainly serve as a kind of cache management front end for certain inline queries. So they don't really enable any functionality that you wouldn't have otherwise. It's only if you have certain queries which are costly that you want to pre-compute, or that you don't want to allow your users to do, then you can move them into the concept namespace. So from this perspective, I'm not surprised that they are not so frequent, because most concepts are just directly formulated in ask queries. I think for the future, it could be interesting to look at the data that we now collect in recent versions about ask queries, because there we have similar information as for concepts, which we didn't have before. So one can now check what are the ask queries in a wiki, how large are they, who is creating them maybe even. It could also be interesting. I think that would give more insights on how people actually access the data than the concept pages.
So I have to say, I think concepts are very useful. So I talked yesterday about conversations with scientists where the first thing they tell me is, if we start defining properties, can you start clustering our data sets and find categories of data sets and help us organize these 70,000 data sets in some sensible way. So I also think that it's curious to me that there's not an explicit categorization of objects, when my experience in the past has been that when you put people in front of having to represent anything, the first thing they do is a taxonomy and categories. So I was really surprised myself, I have to say. But maybe you're right. Maybe I shouldn't be surprised. Maybe you found the explanation.
I think that your intuition is good, but I don't think we have all the features yet to. I don't think we have all the features yet to make concepts into a taxonomy. I think that's the problem. I agree with you. You could actually, concepts would be a starting point to ontological modeling. You could say this concept is a sub-concept of the other one, and you would have an ontology. But since we do not support that, the concepts they are like defined categories, but they are not connected among each other. So their utility in this respect is still limited. Maybe we should work on improving that.
Yeah, I also have a small comment that it's actually good to have maybe this kind of analysis for every feature of Semantic MediaWiki, including do you use these in these result formats, and if so, maybe you have to pay more attention to regressions and so on.
Yeah, so I saw yesterday a new feature where you can actually query the API to see who's creating these dynamic queries in the wiki. We'd love to see how that is being used.
Yeah, I think that some of your indices might be actually very useful to users of a wiki. You know, you might help community understand how it works, and maybe also encourage individuals to maybe rethink things, or at least motivate them. Do you have any plans in this direction, or maybe someone in the room could actually hack an analytics extension?
Yes, I think that's the right direction to move forward to, and to maybe work with the apiary group to see how we can aggregate and understand these things. I think one of the goals is that, data is very interesting, but people are even more interesting than data, I think. And so, when someone downloads the wiki software, to really help them understand how different models might work for them and how the communities are socially set up. So that might be also something to consider.
I just wanted to make the note about the usefulness of the concept namespace from a linguistic perspective, and that's to have on the one hand, classes, let's say a house, but to define in your concept namespace the qualified, any kind of qualified class, such as, let's say, a vacant house, so that you don't intermix these two linguistically different items. So in the concept namespace, I mean, certainly with the caching that Marcus is referring to, you would have a cache of all vacant houses that is drawn out from the entire population of
I'm
houses.
sold. Tell them. The question is, why are they not, getting that? I agree with you. Thank you. And I think, really, this is fantastic to have all these hundreds or thousands of users creating structured content.
Will we have the
throughout.
opportunity to talk to you during the coffee break, or are
Sure.
you leaving right
Sure.
now? Okay,
I'll be here.
cool. Thanks. Okay.